Today, folks, we're going to dive into my $340,000+ Canadian stock portfolio as we pull the veil back on where I think I need to be financially to retire early, my personal goals as we look at the performance of my accounts. We're also going to take a look at the Canadian economy, the interest rate cuts we've seen, how they're affecting your investments, the real estate market. We're going to take a look at stocks that have posted earnings already because they've been doing some finicky things I'm going to reveal to you to make their earnings look better than they would have actually been in this current market environment, because this is a lot tougher of an environment for Canada than it is for other countries. If you are on a path to financial independence, if you damn well want to retire early, go down there, join me by hitting that subscribe button, and like if you enjoy this kind of content. So we're going to come back around and talk about the portfolio and the performance, but more importantly, I want to get an understanding of where we sit in the current economic backdrop of interest rate cuts, because we've all been desperately waiting for this time to come, and there was no holding back. I remember people were saying, oh, they're not going to cut interest rates aggressively, but here we are. And why are they doing this? Why did we see a half basis points? We are now under 4%. And it's simply because they're scared. They think we're probably heading for a recession if we don't start stimulating like really quick. And that's because we're starting to see negative inflation rates month over month. And this is actually not a good thing, because in your mind, you think, hey, prices coming down is better for my wallet. But realistically, that means companies are making less. There's less growth going on. You know, statistically, inflation is a healthy thing for an economy, but everything has to go up with inflation, including wages. And when these things get out of whack is when the economy can start to falter and we get recessionary events. If you take the trailing 12 months here, we can see that the inflation rate is now below the 2% target. We're at 1.6% after coming off the back of major 8% cycles, right? Like an 8% inflation rate is also highly detrimental. But when we zoom out and we look at recessionary events like the 2020 pandemic, we went into negative, inflation. And same with during the 2008 financial crisis and pretty much every crisis past that. But comparably, if we look at the GDP of Canada versus two other major countries, Canada actually doesn't look like it's in that great of a position. We've actually been seeing GDP jump up a little bit, which is great, a 0.5 percentage point. But for the most part, throughout this year, we've actually been seeing negative GDP growth. And all we need is 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP to be in a recession, which we haven't quite got, but we've come damn close here, right? Like we had 1 quarter of 0 growth and one of minus 0.1% growth, right? So if we take a look at that compared to the United States, let's say the US is seeing 3% GDP growth, which is gross domestic product sales, me and you transacting commerce of the entire economy. And this is crazy because even China is growing at roughly a percentage point. So it really goes to show you, against two other major economies, with all the immigration Canada had, we are not seeing the same stimulation, right? And the other problem too now is Canada doesn't have the infrastructure to support obviously all the immigration that we've had. So we're no longer going to be this super fast growing economy because we're putting a halt to immigration, at least until infrastructure and things start to level off with housing. And speaking of housing, how is interest rates affecting this? As somebody that recently just bought a property at a wicked 5.8%, I am very much looking forward to refinancing in the next couple of years, because we got a 3-year fixed rate to kind of ride through this environment and, not struggle in a competing housing market. But right now we're seeing interest rates that you can get for around 4%, which is incredible. We're seeing the average sold price of a home actually increasing, where typically people thought the housing market would stall, because when interest rates are going down, why buy a house today when I can get one at a cheaper rate in probably the coming months? But that's not stopping people from buying. A month over month, there was a 3.2% change in the average sold price, and we're seeing about a 2.2% in the 12-month change across Canada, right? And if we actually just zoom in a little bit and take a look at some of these numbers, the average sold in transactions are starting to trickle back to the upside. And look at the fluctuations in the average sold price of a house. Man, interest rates really took everything for quite a whirlwind, and the average isn't really a good depiction of what's going on in the housing market, because we know highly valued luxury homes have seen the biggest drop in price, whereas homes that are a bit more affordable are actually still moving to some extent. And we've also seen a large just dump of like 1 bedroom and basically studio like apartments coming to Toronto. So it'll be neat to see if we continue to ride through this, as the government obviously will not let housing crash, because we have to support the boomers, we have to support the generation that is retiring on the back of this booming housing cycle. Just think to yourself, would you really want to go back to a housing market where the prices are worth half as much? You might think yes, but the economy is going to be in a complete depression. It is not going to be something we want to see. It's also neat just looking at the average prices per province. Ontario actually was over $1 million for a little bit. We did go through quite a correctional period, but now we're starting to again go back up. So it'll be really neat to see where we end up once interest rates get back to where I'm thinking they're going to level somewhere between 1 and 2.5 percentage points. That's my guess. I think that's where we're going to see a nice leveling off because it's probably a healthier interest rate. And if we take a look, the interest rates are directly affecting the way people invest. I mean, if you take a look at the Vanguard FTSE Canadian Capped REIT Index, I mean, we've seen a massive explosion since the anticipation of interest rate cuts. On the last cut, however, we have not seen another bolstering of these stock prices, which means some of this might have been priced in, and now we're waiting to see the exact effects on mortgages, infrastructure-oriented companies like TELUS that have a lot of debt that are paying, high interest rates right now. So it's going to take some time. Again, we've come out the eye of the storm, but now we have to see the effects of the interest rate cuts actually take hold. This is also alleviating some pressure off the banks that have been really putting a lot of loan loss provisions aside, really kind of just protecting themselves in case loans started to falter, but we haven't quite seen that happen. So long as interest rates come down, the loan loss provisions will probably level off and start declining, which we've seen with some major banks like Royal Bank, and this has led to an increased rally, in the financial institutions. This is H Bank representing basically all the Canadian banks. Now, I also want to point out that earnings have been pretty mixed thus far. We've seen quite a bit of good earnings, but it's also on the back of share buybacks, right? Like Canadian National Railway just posted, and the stock hasn't done a whole lot, basically for the last 5 years. Doesn't mean it's not a great company. It is arguably one of the most recession-proof businesses because rail ships a lot of stuff you can't ship by truck, like chemicals. It is a very resilient thing that is basically unreplaceable in the market right now. But if we take a look at their share buyback program, this is what's been really stimulating the growth of the company. I mean, we're talking about a company that recently has been doing record share buybacks to bolster the earnings. Because if we take a look, year over year, there hasn't really been that much revenue growth. Yes, it's trickling to the upside, which is great. It's nice to see, obviously, revenues increasing, but not at any major extent. This is a very slow revenue growth period for a lot of companies because, again, the market isn't being stimulated, right? But if you take a look at the diluted earnings here, I mean, we're talking about a pretty nice, healthy increase. Again, when you keep buying shares back off the table, that means there's less shares in the float out in the economy. So if I make the same cash flow, but that cash flow is being compared to less earnings, it increases the earnings per share, right? Now, this is a very safe, resilient company that recently just increased the dividend as well. This is a dividend growth beast. It's one of the reasons people love the railways, even just from this time last year, from 79 cents to 84.5 cents is really nice to see. Or again, over the 9 months, $2.53 versus $2.37. So for those that love dividends and income, these are one of those kind of recession stable, places where you can consistently get a very reliable yield, even in the backdrop of a tough market environment. And again, these earnings are great. I'm not saying these earnings are terrible by any metric, but again, if you just take a look at the revenue of a company like this, it's been kind of stagnating. We're seeing this with quite a few companies out there. Even in the back of a lot of the US earnings we've seen, again, good earnings per share are great. This is how Apple has been avoiding a really severe, crash because they've had no revenue growth for quite some time. But again, you can manipulate the books to increase earnings to make shareholders continually happy. So what does this all mean for my portfolio? How am I adjusting to this market environment? Because man, we've gone on one hell of a wicked tear. If we take a look at the performance of my tax-free savings account, I mean, I am up 211% since I started investing in this account in June of 2017. How many years is that? 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 7 years we've been investing in this account, and we've been outpacing the market. The S&P only up 139% roughly in the same time period. In my RSP, this is a whole nother level of performance, primarily driven by Tesla gains. I know I'm not really playing Tesla like I used to here, but I really took a lot of my Tesla gains and put it into SCHD, as many of you are aware. But we are up now over 300% against the S&P. It's only up 93%. I opened this account in August of 2019, and now I'm sitting in a place, and a reason that I'm not as risk on is I'm getting to the end of this journey of basically having enough capital to float my expenses, my base expenses, to keep my life going, right? Which technically is buying your time. I now have enough money, capital invested, that I don't need to worry about a job anymore. I don't have to rely on people. It's kind of like the definition of FU money. It's a place of stability and reliance. Now, my portfolio on its own would not be enough. life, right? But I'm also engaged. My fiance, she also has a very healthy portfolio, and our goals right now are to max out our tax-free savings account after purchasing a piece of real estate. And it's going to take roughly, my guess, because my corporation has a lot of money that I'm just not touching, but I'm going to be paying that out to some extent as well. But if we take a look, I think to be in the best place possible for where I'd want to be is around 300,000 more between my wife and I, right? 300K would max out our tax-free savings accounts and also pay off the mortgage. In my personal TFSA, I've got about another $75,000 of room. My goal is to achieve this sometime within the next 3 to 5 years. I really want to be at the door of retirement by the time I'm about 35, and I'm 32 right now. And to come up with an extra 300K isn't going to be the easiest thing imaginable, but obviously if the market environment keeps going up the way it's going up, which I'm not relying on, and my job stays as reliable as it has been, which there's no guarantee, I could get there well before I'm 40. Like, we've really set up the foundation that doesn't require high risk investments like it once did. That's why I'm not really as advantageous, even though we do have investments in Bitcoin, crypto. We've got investments in small caps we've talked about on this channel. I primarily try and present to you the core fundamentals of the portfolio because ETFs at scale are just a more reliable way than owning 40 or 50 individual stocks that you can just not manage correctly. I do believe the passively weighted index that John Bogle, again, rest in peace your soul, basically if your market cap expands, you get a bigger weighting in the portfolio, is a more genius system, because I personally wouldn't have bought Nvidia. Nvidia has been a growth beast and continues to be, and is now almost the largest company in the US. Like I said, I wouldn't have gone out of my way to purchase that, and same with a lot of the chip companies, but because the S&P is weighting them by market cap, we've gotten the advantage either way. So our YouTube journey here as well, I don't know how long this is going to last. I'm surprised I've been able to do this as long as I have since 2019, but the goal here is to show you as it unfolds in real time, somebody that is just like anybody else that never really made more than 50K a year up to the last couple years, was able to build such a resilient portfolio and buy real estate in one of the most expensive cities in the world, and actually be able to pull this off just through frugality and a way of life that anybody could live. Getting rich is by no means something that you have to be acquired to do, something that you have to be privileged to do. Anybody can realistically do this. It's the beauty of the way capitalism in the Western world is kind of set up, and I hope you're taking advantage to live your best life and buy your own time back to spend it with your family and the things that truly matter. But I will pass that question off to you. I'd love to know what you think in that comment section below.